For generations, dragons have been feared, monsters of fire and destruction, nothing more than legends whispered by frightened villagers. But what if the stories were wrong? One boy, one choice, a moment that would change everything. To tame a dragon is not to command it, but to earn its trust. The coastal village of Eldamir had long feared the shadow of dragons. For generations, tales of fire and destruction had been whispered over flickering candlelight, turning every distant roar of the sea into the imagined growl of a winged beast. To the villagers, dragons were nothing more than ruthless monsters, creatures to be hunted before they could burn the town to cinders. Archie had never believed in the hysteria. He had spent his life as an outcast, an orphan blacksmith's apprentice who never quite fit in with the hard and superstitious folk of Eldamir. While the others spoke of omens and curses, he saw nothing but myths used to justify their own fears, and yet, when he stumbled upon the injured dragon, even he felt a jolt of terror. It had been a routine trip to the cliffs, a chance to gather fallen iron deposits and scavenge driftwood for the forge. The salty breeze was thick in the air as he made his way down a narrow, rocky path, one he had walked many times before. But this time, something was different. A deep guttural groan echoed from the craggy outcrop below. Archie froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. His instincts told him to run, to turn back before he saw whatever it is that made that sound. But curiosity won out. Carefully he stepped closer and peered over the edge. Lying among the jagged rocks was a dragon. Its black scales glistened under the fading sunlight, each one marred with cuts and dried blood. Its wings, powerful and vast, lay crumbled beneath its weight, as though they had failed in its time of need. The creature's long body rose and fell with labored breaths, and when its piercing yellow eyes flickered open, Archie felt her gaze put him in place. Panic clawed at his mind. This was a beast capable of tearing him apart with a single swipe of its talons, and yet it did not move. It was weak, too weak to stand. He saw the way its limbs trembled when it tried to lift itself, only to collapse once more with a frustrated growl. Archie should have run. Any other villager would have sounded the alarm, gathered their weapons, and returned with torches to finish the job. But he didn't move. Instead, he saw something in the dragon's eyes. Not just pain, but exhaustion, desperation. Before he knew it, he was already making a choice. That night, Archie snuck into the village under the cover of darkness. Slipping into the butcher's shop was easy. The old man who owned it had grown careless in his routines. He swiped scraps of discarded meat, stuffing them into a satchel before making his way back to the cliffs. The dragon let out a warning growl as he approached, but its body remained too weak to act on the threat. Archie hesitated, then slowly unfastened the satchel, pulling out the pieces of raw meat. He tossed the first toward the dragon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a weary grunt, the dragon inched forward, its snout twitching as it sniffed the offering. A second later, it snapped up the meat, swallowing it whole. Archie let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He tossed another piece and another, until the dragon had eaten every scrap. This became his secret ritual. Each day he brought food, never speaking a word, but always watching as the dragon slowly regained its strength. The creature never showed gratitude, but it stopped growling when Archie approached, and his piercing yellow eyes no longer held the same feral distrust. However, secrets never stayed hidden in Eldamir. The villagers were not fools. They noticed the missing meat, the strange way Archie disappeared for hours at a time. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. "Archie's been sneaking off again," muttered one fisherman. "Could be feeding a pack of wolves," another suggested. "Or something else," came the dark reply. One questioned, Archie merely laughed, waving off the accusations with a careless grin. "Just feeding some stray dogs and gullible seagulls," he said. But deep down, he knew his time was running out. Archie had spent years shaping metal, molding it under heat and pressure until it took the form he desired. But the wounded dragon was no iron blade. No hammer could force it to bend to his will. If he wanted his trust, he would have to earn it, not forge it. As the days turned to weeks, the dragon began to change. At first, it simply tolerated Archie's presence, watching him with its wary, golden eyes. Then its growls became softer, no longer a warning, but something closer to acknowledgement. It allowed him to sit within reach, though never too close. Its wounds were healing, the deep gashes across its body fading into scars. But it still did not attempt to leave. Perhaps it could not. Perhaps it did not want to. Archie wasn't sure. At the forge, his thoughts drifted constantly to the creature. His hands worked on autopilot, shaping horseshoes and nails, but his mind was elsewhere. The village had its legends, tales of warriors who had once ridden dragons, soaring above the sea cliffs, their bond unbreakable. Of course, those were just stories, remnants of an era long past. No one believed them anymore. And yet, as Archie shaped metal late into the night, something inside him stirred. It started as an idle curiosity, a thought that refused to leave him. If there was even a sliver of truth to those legends, what if the bond between man and dragon could be rekindled? He did not need to tame the beast, he did not even wish to, but what if he could forge something different? A partnership, a mutual respect. The idea took hold in him like a fire to his chest. And so, in the quiet hours before dawn, Archie began crafting. The harness was a work of obsession. He shaped leather straps reinforced with metal fastenings, adjusting them for something far larger than any horse. He knew it was foolish, knew that he had no right to expect the dragon to accept it, but still he worked. Each day he returned to the cliffs, and each day the dragon changed just a little more. It stretched its wings now, testing them, though it had yet to take flight. It moved with greater confidence, stepping away from its resting place more often, though it never ventured far. It listened when Archie spoke, not in the way a human would, but with a quiet understanding. And Archie did speak. At first he spoke simply to fill the silence, telling the dragon about the forge, about the stubborn villagers who never quite trusted him. But soon his words carried more weight. He spoke of his loneliness, of the way he had never truly belonged in Eldamir, of the fact that despite being among people his whole life, he had always felt like an outsider. The dragon never replied, but its gaze steady and unblinking, held a strange sort of knowing. One evening, as the sky burned red with the setting sun, Archie reached out. His hand hovered inches from the dragon's dark scales. Its breathing was slow, steady. This was the moment. But before his fingers could brush against its hide, the dragon moved. Faster than he could react, it snapped its powerful jaws toward his outstretched hand, teeth flashing in the dim light. Archie yanked his arm back, heart pounding as he stumbled away. The dragon let out a low growl, not one of hostility, but of warning. Archie took a deep breath, his pulse still racing. "I get it," he murmured. "Not yet." Trust was not given freely. It was something that had to be built, piece by piece, just like the harness in his forge. He would not rush this, so he sat back down, keeping his hands to himself, and spoke once more. The cliffs were eerily silent when Archie arrived. The usual sight of the dragon resting among the rocks was gone. No dark silhouette against the sea, no slow rise and fall of breathing. The spot where it had once curled up was empty, its imprint barely visible in the dust. Archie's stomach twisted. Had it finally recovered and left? Or worse, had the villagers found it? His pulse quickened as he scanned the cliffs, his fingers tightening around the satchel of food he had brought. 100 terrible possibilities ran through his mind, each worse than the last. The thought of hunters tracking the dragon, of finding only a blood-stained patch of earth, made his breath catch in his throat. "Hey," he called out, his voice shallowed by the vast emptiness around him. "Are you here?" No response. He clenched his jaw. Maybe this was for the best. Maybe the dragon had healed enough to leave, and had simply moved on. But a strange heaviness settled in his chest as he thought. He had spent weeks tending to the creature, talking to it, forging a connection he could barely understand. The idea that it was simply gone left a hollow ache in his ribs. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he muttered, "I guess that's..." The air shifted. A gust of wind, unnatural and powerful, roared down from above. Archie barely had time to react before a massive shadow passed overhead, blocking out the last light of the evening sun. Then, with a rush of a movement, the dragon landed directly in front of him. Its wings sent up a cloud of dust, and its talons dug into the earth, its black scales gleaming in the fading light. Archie stumbled back, eyes wide, his heart slamming against his ribs. But the dragon did not growl, it did not snarl or bare its teeth. Instead, it did something that made Archie forget how to breathe. It lowered its head. Not much, just enough that its golden eyes met at his level. Just enough that it was no longer looking down at him, but inviting him closer. Archie swallowed hard. This was trust. Slowly, cautiously, he took a step forward, then another. The dragon did not move away. His trembling hand reached out, hovering just above its rough scales. This time it did not snap at him. His fingers pressed against its hide, cool, textured, alive. A breath left his lips in an unsteady exhale. A grin pulled at his face, unbidden. "Guess you don't hate me after all." The dragon huffed, a short, warm gust of air ruffling his hair. Archie chuckled, then glanced down at the harness slung over his shoulder, the one that he had spent weeks forging, never truly believing he would have a chance to use it. But now here he was, with the dragon standing before him, trusting him. "Alright," he murmured, his hands working swiftly, fastening the harness around the dragon's neck and shoulders. The creature rumbled, but did not resist. Archie took a deep breath, and then, without warning, the dragon moved. A powerful leap, a surge of motion, and suddenly, he was flying. The ground fell away beneath him as the dragon's wings unfurled, catching the wind with breathtaking force. Archie clung to the harness, his breath stolen by the sheer velocity as he soared over the cliffs. The sea stretched endlessly below, glimmering under the twilight sky. The wind roared past his ears, and for the first time in his life, Archie felt something that had always eluded him. Freedom. The legends had been true, and he was a part of one now. The night air was cool against Archie's skin as he and the dragon soared high above the coastline. The rush of their first flight had left him breathless, but now, as they circled over the darkened village of Eldamir, his exhilaration was replaced by a heavy weight of realization. He couldn't hide this forever. For weeks, he had kept his dragon a secret, nursing it back to health, forging a bond stronger than anything he had ever known. But what was the end goal? To keep sneaking off the cliffs forever? To pretend the world below wouldn't change? No. Archie had never fit into Eldamir, but if there was one thing he knew, it was that change never came without someone daring to take the first step. If humans and dragons could truly coexist, someone had to prove it was possible. He would be that someone. Taking a deep breath, he patted the dragon's side. "Alright, big guy, let's do something crazy." The dragon let out a low grumble, as if to say, as if we haven't already. Archie grinned, then with a nudge to the harness, he guided the beast toward the village. The reaction was immediate. The moment the dragon's shadow passed over the rooftops, panic erupted. Screams filled the streets, people ran for cover, bolting into their homes, slamming doors shut. Others grabbed pitchforks as axes, whatever weapons they could find, forming a makeshift militia in the town square. Archie had expected fear, but this was something else. "Wait," he shouted as they descended, his voice barely carrying over the chaos. "Don't attack!" The dragon touched down just outside the village square, wings kicking up dust. The moment its talons met the ground, the mob surged forward, their eyes already with fear. The dragon let out a sharp growl, tensing beneath him. Archie could feel the shudder in its muscles. It wasn't attacking, it was afraid. It felt their fear, their hostility, and if things went badly, it wouldn't hesitate to defend itself. Archie slid off its back and threw up his arms. "Stop, just listen." No one moved, the weapons didn't lower. The air was thick with tension, crackling like a storm ready to break. Archie's heart pounded. He had one chance to make them see what he saw. Then movement. A small figure broke free from the crowd. A girl no older than 6 or 7, her blonde braids bouncing as she ran past a line of terrified villagers. "Ellie," her mother shrieked, but the child didn't stop. Archie's breath caught as the little girl slowed, hesitated for only a moment, then took another step forward. The dragon rumbled, lowering its head slightly, watching her with cautious, unblinking golden eyes. Ellie didn't flinch. She had lifted a tiny hand, small, fragile, trusting. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, with a slow exhale, the dragon lowered its massive snout to meet her touch. Ellie's fingers brushed against the rough, black scales. She giggled, running her tiny hands along the creature's nose. "You're warm," she murmured in awe. The dragon let out a deep sigh, its breath rolling over her in a warm gust. The tension in the square broke. The villagers didn't charge forward, but they didn't attack either. Instead, they stood frozen, watching as a child, the bravest among them, petted a dragon. Archie turned back to them. "See?" his voice hoarse. "It's not a monster." Silence. Then slowly, hesitantly, someone else stepped forward. A man weathered with age, his grip still tight around a rusted pitchfork, but his gaze was softer now. His eyes flicked between the dragon and Ellie, and after a long moment, he loosened his grip. Then another villager moved, and another. Curiosity began to overcome fear. One by one, the people of Eldamir inched forward, toward the dragon they had feared their entire lives. Change did not happen overnight. Fear was deeply ingrained in the people of Eldamir, passed down through generations like an old rusted blade. But fear was not invisible. It could be dulled, reshaped, just as Archie had spent his life reshaping iron at the forge. And just as he had tamed fire in his hands, he had helped tame something even greater. In the weeks following the first moment of trust, the village, slowly, began to transform. At first, it was just whispers, hesitant conversations, and hushed tones. People spoke not of monsters, but of possibilities. The once terrified villagers kept their distance, watching the dragon from afar. But as time passed, some grew bold enough to step closer, to observe, to wonder. Then, the most remarkable thing happened. Dragons, wild ones, the kind that had always lingered at the edges of human lands, began to appear, not attacking, not hunting, simply watching. Perhaps in some way they sensed a change. And Archie, he had become something he had never thought he would be. A leader. He never sought the role, never asked for the villagers to look at him for guidance. But they did. They came to him with questions, with uncertainty, with cautious hope. How should they act around a dragon? What signs should they look for? How could they approach without being seen as a threat? And so, for the first time in his life, Archie belonged. He taught them what he had learned, how to read a dragon's posture, how to recognize curiosity versus fear. He showed them how to offer food without expectation, how to understand that trust was never truly given, only earned. Slowly, others followed his lead. The once feared creatures began to integrate into the village, perching atop rooftops, gliding over fields without drawing arrows. A tentative harmony formed, not perfect, not without missteps, but real. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Archie stood at the edge of the cliffs. His dragon, his friend, stood beside him. Below, the village stretched out in a way it never had before. Smoke curled from chimneys, but not from fear-driven bonfires. The blacksmith's forge burned bright, now crafting tools not for hunting, but for understanding. Dragons soared overhead, their massive wings casting long shadows over the land. And below, children pointed and laughed, instead of screaming in terror. The age of dragon hunters was over. Archie closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the salt air, the scent of earth and fire and freedom. He had spent his whole life as an outcast, never truly belonging in Eldamir. But now, as he stood there, watching dragons and humans share the same sky, he realized the truth. He was never meant to belong to the village as it was. He was meant to build the village as it could be. With a quiet smile, he turned to the dragon beside him, running a hand along its familiar black-scaled neck. "Ready?" he asked. The dragon rumbled in response, muscles coiling as it prepared for flight. Archie took one last look at the world he had helped create. Then, with a leap of faith, they soared into the sky, toward a future where humans and dragons would rise together.